and welcome to part 2 of my presentation on the civil rights movement, summarizing the main points in the film series, The Eyes on the Prize. Today we'll be going over parts 3 and 4 of Eyes on the Prize. So let's get to it. Okay, so for part 3, I believe the three main points that kind of go over is the Nashville sit-ins, the Kennedy calls, and the Freedom Ride. So, for the Nashville sit-ins, they were kind of this thing led by a guy named Jim Larson. So, Nashville was very famous for being progressive and modern, but the thing was, the only thing they weren't really modern about was their racist beliefs. It's very racist, and it's kind of not great. So, some guy named Jim Larson set about to change this, and he actually organized workshops teaching people, especially the college students from the nearby college, about nonviolence. So in this workshop they would practice hitting each other, calling each other names, and above all, tolerating it, not moving, and not being violent. A lot of knots. It's kind of a not doing anything movement except for sitting. And they did this so that way you couldn't blame them, but they could also still stand up for what they believe in. So he got students to go and sit in a restaurant where they would not normally be served because it was against the rules for colored people to be served in certain restaurants. And they sat there, and for the first 2 weeks, actually nothing really happened. But on the second week, some gangs started attacking, and the police arrested them. A guy named Lube tried to defend them in court, but they were still found guilty. And so, since they were found guilty, the African American community protested with what was known as the Easter boycott. So the Easter boycott in Nashville, so like in the African American community, Easter was a big thing. There was a ton of shopping for Easter. You stayed up forever to get your Easter suit. So to boycott the downtown area at the time of Easter was a serious cutback on, money everywhere. The white citizens stayed out of downtown because it wasn't safe because nobody was there. African Americans who did try to go downtown were often had their bags stolen by other African Americans trying to keep people out of downtown, although they tried to avoid being violent, tried to avoid all that jazz. Because, non-violent movement's kind of the idea. And after a while, the African Americans even got together and did a little march to stand up for their rights. So, that is what happened. And this was not in vain, because the mayor came out and told the marchers that he felt as a man, not a politician, but as a man, that he felt segregation was wrong. And this was a turning point. 3 weeks later, the students were served in the restaurants they had previously been denied service at. As a result of this movement, a group was founded named SNCC. It was made up of the college kids there who were trying to end segregation, and a woman named Ella Baker, who was extremely famous in the African American community, told the students to stay independent and not join the NAACP because they needed to be able to make their own decisions and stuff. So that was the first major point, I suppose you could say, of part 3. The second major point was the Kennedy calls. It was basically just Martin Luther got arrested. Kennedy gave Mrs. Luther a call, or Mrs. King, I suppose. Mrs. King a call and was like, hey, if there's anything I can do, let me know. And then she was like, oh my gosh, could you? That would be great. And then he was like, yeah, hey. Then she called up another person. He's like, hey, Judge, I need you to get Martin Luther King out of jail. And he was out of jail soon. And everyone was like, oh my gosh, he's so great. We're going to vote for him. And so they voted for him, and that was how it happened. So the last point, really, in part 3 was the Freedom Ride, which I'd actually never heard of before, so it was really cool to learn about it. So the Freedom Ride, it started on May 4th, 1961. And what it basically is there was this bus, and it traveled, it was the normal bus system, but a whole bunch of African Americans and a few white citizens, too, really bound together with them, and they all got together, and they rode the bus through the southern states, and the point of this was to make sure that African Americans could travel through America, across the country, without any problem. So when they would get to a place, they would go, and the white Freedom Riders would go in the colored section, and the African American Freedom Riders would go in the white section, and they would try to use all the faculties and everything and see how it went. The first few states that did this in were alright, and no big shakes, nothing big, pretty chill. But then after a while, they were leaving one place and they had to split into 2 highways to get to the destination. One bus on one highway got bombed, and 12 people were hospitalized, and it was bad. Oh, and the bus was destroyed. And the other bus, when they arrived at the destination, they met by a mob, which is fun, because mobs are fun, right? They could either exit through the back of the bus and try to avoid the mob, or they can exit through the front of the bus and meet the mob, and they chose to enter through the front of the bus and confront the mob head on. As a result, some of them got severely injured, including one sir. Actually, it's not a sir, it's just a guy's name. James Burke. James Burke got hurt. It was rough. Kennedy, hearing about this, as we just heard, he was kind of supportive of the African American community and all that. It's kind of how he got elected. So he supported the Riders, and he was like, "Hey, yo, ambassador dude who's on my side, but he wasn't his. You know what? There was this guy named John Singleton, and Kennedy sent him as an ambassador of the president to the state officials of Alabama and was like, dude, tell them to protect the bus riders. And when he went there and was like, yeah, guys, ambassador dude, you need to protect the freedom bus riders, they were like, no. Well, at least the mayor was. The mayor was against it, and they went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until eventually, the public safety guy was like, you know what, we'll do it. Okay, man, let's go do it. Good. And so they decided to do it. A plane accompanied the bus for a little bit of the ways, and there was troops that helped them out until suddenly the plane and the troops disappeared. And the people were like, well, that's a little weird. And then there was another mob, and they're like, you're not helping like you told us you would. What is going on? Suppose you guys are just backstabbers fun. So, yeah, mob attacked. A guy named Jim Suey, who was a white man helping out, he bore the main brunt of the assault. He exited the bus first. So Kennedy's like, alright, you know what, you're not helping. I'm just gonna do this directly. So he sent direct troops to assist them, and they rode the bus with them, and they kept them safe. Yeah. King and some civil rights movement people, they met up in a church to support them, and then there was a mob outside, and they're like, this isn't good. And the state finally of Alabama finally had to speak up and sent troops and quieted the whole situation down. So, yeah, and the result of the ride was that African Americans were allowed to travel through the United States safely. So that was cool. So that was part 3. Part 4 is what I will be talking about next right now. So, Albany. That was a major point in part 4. Albany was actually kind of viewed as a failed civil rights attempt. So what happened there was, it was led by this guy named Anderson and Shuttlesworth, and they tried really hard by a series of sit-ins and boycotts to end, and picketing. They tried to end segregation in Alabama. Not Alabama. Alabama. So in Albany, and unfortunately, the people were not very responsive. Martin Luther King Jr. came in just to give a speech, to motivate, but then the leader of the movement asked him to stay, and so he did. But the problem was, Luther couldn't be there all the time. So when Luther was there, it was even bigger and better, but when he left, it was smaller than it was before, because the super awesome celebrity wasn't there anymore, and everyone was kind of like, I'm doing better without you, why don't you come? But anyways, that's what happened, and after a while, nothing was really happening. There was this guy who was named Larry Pruitt, and he was like, I read your book, Martin Luther King Jr., I know how to deal with you, and he actually used the strategy of nonviolence to fight nonviolence by dispersing the African Americans through different jails, and so that way his jail wouldn't get overflowing, like how was the strategy with nonviolence. And so Martin Luther King Jr. was like, dude, this isn't working, what am I gonna do? And so he just kind of depressedly left, and it was kind of rough. And the other people out, we were like, we're not giving up, and they didn't give up. But the SCLC moved on to Birmingham, which was the next major thing, then kind of talked about and kind of left Albany on the side. So, Birmingham was run by Bull Connor. Well, it wasn't run by Bull Connor. He was the Secretary of the Public. You know what? He was in charge of public safety. Didn't like African Americans. Didn't defend them. Ran things in Birmingham. And then all of a sudden there was new elections, and people were like, "Dude, I don't like Bull Connor anymore." Yeah, no. And so they were trying to elect Bull Connor out. But after the election, the old city council refused to step down. So what would happen was there would be a new city council and they would be meeting, and then all of a sudden there would be this old city council and they would be meeting, and then there would just both two governments at once. What's going on? What's going on? It's insane. But until the whole thing got resolved, Bull Connor maintained control of public safety and all that jazz. So yeah, since Bull Connor was arresting protesters, there was more, I suppose, less buying of the Easter products, which made business go down, which made the movement more good. But African Americans actually were really scared of getting arrested because in the jails you could get lynched, you may never come back, and so it was kind of a scary thing when Bull Connor was arresting all these people, and it was quite frightening time for them. Kennedy protested the protest there, saying it was ill-timed, but Martin Luther King Jr., he said, later means never. We aren't holding back any longer. We aren't waiting any longer. We're doing this now. And even some children got together. It was a big organized thing. The children protested on D-Day. There were 700 children who got arrested by Thursday. So the people came out to protest these children getting arrested. And to counterback them, Bull sent out firemen with water hoses spraying at 100 miles an hour on these people, which isn't cool. It was enough to take bark off of trees. Let's not do that to people, okay? He also loosed dogs on them, and it was like, it went everywhere. It was all over the news. It was all over the papers. It was all over everywhere. And it was like, America, what you doing? And it was really not good. So that was that. Kind of went rough. Bevel actually, at one point when he was losing all these things, Bevel actually kept the African Americans peaceful, but on May 7th, violence finally broke out, and both sides agreed to a truce. They met, and the business leaders, because where's the government? That's not doing anything. It's like, doesn't even have its own stuff worked out. There's two people left. So, two different councils. You know what? We're just going to meet among ourselves. So, this businessmen and the civil rights leaders, they met, and together they worked out the Birmingham Agreement. And that was good, except the Ku Klux Klan didn't like that, and so later they tried to do stuff, but he's still here, so he lost. Kennedy then was like, you know what, I'm going to pass the Civil Rights Bill because I'm feeling so great about this. And the African Americans were like, we're going to go on protest in Washington. And he was like, what? No, I'm passing a bill for you. Please don't come here. What? But they were like, yeah, we're going to do it anyways. And like 200,000 people arrived, and it was pretty cool. So yeah, that's what happened. It was pretty cool. They fed them with cheese sandwiches. Something. So yeah. 2 weeks later, after the huge protest and Kennedy's bill got passed, and I was like, oh, yay! Alabama church got bombed, 4 kids died. It was really depressing, and that was the end of the depressing episode of Eyes on the Prize. But I mean, the whole civil rights movement is both depressing and encouraging because, while at the same time it shows how evil mankind can get, it also shows how we can overcome these cultural barriers and horrible human things. So, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If there's any way I can improve these in the future, please let me know. I would love to improve them for your sake.